Twitter Files journalist Michael Shellenberger had this to say in his opening statement to Congress in the House Commerce, Communications, and Technology hearing on preserving free speech and reining in big tech censorship yesterday.
Here are events that actually happened. Twitter suspended a woman for saying, quote, "Women aren't men." Facebook censored accurate information about COVID vaccine side effects. Twitter censored a Harvard professor of epidemiology for expressing his opinion that children did not need the COVID vaccine. Facebook censored speculation that the coronavirus came from a lab. Facebook censored a journalist for saying accurately that natural disasters were getting better, not worse. Twitter permanently suspended a sitting president of the United States, even though Twitter's censors themselves had decided he had not violated its terms of service. Now, maybe that kind of censorship doesn't bother you because people were doing their best to prevent real-world harm with the knowledge they had at the time.
He then posed this question.
But what if the shoe were on the other foot? Consider how you would feel if the following occurred. Twitter suspended a woman for saying trans women are women. Facebook censored accurate information about COVID vaccine benefits. Twitter censored a Harvard professor for saying children needed to be COVID vaxxed annually. Facebook censored speculation that the coronavirus came from nature. Facebook censored a member of Congress for saying the world is going to end in 12 years because of climate change. Twitter permanently suspended President Biden, even though, according to Twitter's top censor, he had not violated its terms.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to argue with. I mean, ironically, I remember a time when the left used to be upset about, and maybe still is, but about social media platforms censoring things like jokes about, white people's tears and stuff like that, whereas accounts that were, let's say, explicitly racist weren't getting censored. And there were all these battles on Twitter all the time about how I said, I roll white people, and I got my account taken down, and someone else said white power, and they didn't get their account taken down. And I think that everyone is always going to have those kinds of issues with content moderation decisions. Who can tell what is actual racism versus what is a joke about race and all of this, which is why I think a standard that says that's more laissez-faire is probably more equitable.
And content moderation at scale is extremely difficult, and people have a tendency to go, why is this allowed and this not allowed, when this seems like it violates the rules more than this. And then people forget often that most of content moderation is being done, it's done after the fact. So, well, nobody complained about that yet. Somebody complained about this, it was flagged, it was reviewed, no one has flagged that. I mean, which also goes to show you, just how some of these problems are going to get worse the more and more content there is. And it would be insane to expect, and it wouldn't devolve to our benefit either, to have the platforms reviewing the content and then letting it go live. They can't do that. It would just be impossible.
Which is why it is frustrating, I gotta say, given that most of the moderation that's happening is happening at the algorithmic level. So little of the conversation that we've been having with respect to the Twitter files is about that. And it's not their fault. I mean, they don't have as much, I'm sure, transparency into the algorithmic choices that are being made. And it requires probably a greater degree of technical know-how to really assess what's going on there. But it is the case that these affirmative decisions that are being made about high-profile folks like Trump and other politicos are a very small piece of the pie, and that your average human being is getting caught up in algorithmic changes like the one that had the Hill shut down for 2 weeks because we played a Trump video in which he did election denialism. I mean, that is like a bigger fish issue, but most people are just, they'll never know to what extent their content just isn't good or they're not getting boosted by an algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Matt Taibbi stirred the pot on Twitter on yesterday when he tweeted, "I'm an independent now," to which someone replied, "Are you still a Democrat?" Then another user wrote, "Which means Republican." Taibbi responded to this exchange with, "No, it doesn't, but talk like this is a big part of why I left the Democratic Party. It's always vote for us or you're a right-wing insurrectionist Putin lover, which is the opposite of persuasive." So Taibbi coming out as independent seems to me to be not especially surprising. He is someone who I think self-described as a Democrat who would vote for people like Joe Biden much longer than I think a lot of people in my leftist community would. So it's surprising to that end. A lot of us have been kind of identifying as independents for a long time. But I tend to agree with him that the idea of identifying as independent does get you a lot of backlash from mainstream Democrats who perceive that as a kind of soft move to conservatism. What make you of it?
It's just another example of this trend of people who would have once been accepted in progressive or left circles, now, being independent and almost having friendlier ties to some on the right, the way Joe Rogan does, the way Tulsi Gabbard does, the way, and on and on and on, all these, Russell Brand almost, Glenn Greenwald, people who are friendly on the show and have been on the show in the past, whose worldviews, especially on these issues, I strongly agree with, especially on the speech, tech, censorship, all that stuff. I think it's probably ultimately a criticism of mainstream Democrats and mainstream media for making these people who are not saying anything that should be counter to what a progressive thinks about free speech and censorship, but these people don't feel welcome in those circles anymore because of the enormous, for many reasons, but including, I think, the enormous capture of mainstream media and Democratic Party by national security and law enforcement that kind of occurred during the Trump years, whereby you just hear endlessly about, if you watch CNN, MSNBC, if you read New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, it's all about how bad faith Russian actors are destroying our democracy on social media.
And Taibbi was the way he got alienated from liberals after being
he's been trying to preach sanity on Russia for the beginning since the 90s.
And saying he was a liberal darling, the broad left darling for many years, and the reason the fracture happened over his Russiagate reporting. Yeah. At the end of the day, he couldn't survive that. Trump became this animating force that defined all of American politics. And I will say also on the right, it's not as though Liz Cheney is getting a warm reception in the Republican Party. People who have come out and been critical of Trump have been ousted as well, and many people have tried to claw their way back in, kissing the ring.
Yeah, there's always some coalition shifting. Right, Liz Cheney out of the coalition, Adam Kinzinger out of the coalition. I saw he must have made some comments about that he doesn't like the fetishization of guns or something that goes on in Republican cultures, and immediately people found a photo of him doing the, these are my guns and I love them photo with like his brother from 2014. But that's right. So he doesn't sound like that anymore because he's now part of the Democratic coalition. It doesn't matter what he says about his nominal affiliation. He's part of the Democratic coalition, and so the things he says, the attitudes he takes, the things he focuses on will align with the Democratic coalition. And, increasingly that's going to happen with people like Joe Rogan, with people like the independent-minded people we're talking about, because they're getting a warmer reception from Republicans.
Well, but
it's going to be hard not to feel captured.
I am not a Democrat.
I'm not condoning it. I'm saying that's the...
But I have a problem with this because I'm not a Democrat, but no one who ever listened to the words coming out of my mouth would ever think that I would in a million years have any sympathy with the Republican Party, because my critique is of a corporate style of politics that is equally present in both of those two corporate parties. Why would I jump out of a frying pan into a fire? That's ridiculous. So my concern, and I think the concern of some people, progressives, who also don't identify as Democrat, is that some folks like Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald and even Joe Rogan, who have at times been critical of Democrats for the right reasons, sometimes decline. And I'm painting with a very broad brush here. I don't think it's true of all the people I just mentioned. But at times decline to raise the identical critiques that can be made of the Republican Party in a way that stops, it shifts from feeling like a genuine ideological disagreement on principle to more of a vibes shift. And what you said about, I get a warmer reception in the Republican Party, it shouldn't be about where you get a warmer reception. Yeah. Intellectually, interpersonally, I agree that is happening and that it's easier to be around people who are nice to you, obviously, and the liberals should consider that in their approach. But intellectually, in terms of thought leaders and people that I respect and who I listen to, it is troubling that would start to have an effect on these principled critiques that you have rightly made of the left when you are now being embraced by the right. You have to have the integrity to continue to push back against systems that are a problem, even if the people who are part of the systems are nicer to you. Yeah,
no, I don't disagree with you at all. It's a lesson for the Democratic Party, for actual members of Congress. I mean, we've watched, the other hearing, the hearing with Taibbi and Shellenberger, and the level of contempt for them on these issues was really stunning. And it's just going to drive away people, from D to I. To R.
Now, I wish there were some real good third-party options, because then I think the slippage would be more difficult. If independents could prove their independence and have some place where they could actually rally around shared interests outside of the two-party system, I think there would be a lot of opportunities for strength there. And yet, there are systemic barriers to that happening.
Very sad. We'll have more Rising right after this.